Thank you, Rajul, and thank you to Schengen for inviting me here. We've been trying to organize having a seminar for quite some time now, so I'm very pleased to be here and pleased to be the first speaker of the year. Before I start this presentation, just two quick words about Biodiversity International. We are based in Rome. We're a 40-year-old organization. Our objectives are essentially to increase the use of agricultural biodiversity in consumption systems, production systems, seed systems, and to conserve and safeguard that agricultural biodiversity through ex situ, in situ, and on-farm conservation. I could give a whole speech about that, but I think I'll leave it there. Happy to say more later. So what I'm going to present today is actually a new area of work that Biodiversity is initiating. This is based on a proposal we submitted to a foundation that went quite far in that process, and we think it's a really innovative idea for how we can attack these issues and challenges facing not only urban areas, and Rajul mentioned, that rapid urbanization, et cetera, but also in the areas immediately surrounding cities. So this is a bit different from maybe the urban-rural dynamic that we so often talk about. So we all know now the impact that diet is having on the global burden of disease. This is a report that was issued by WHO showing that really 6 of the top 11 risk factors in the global burden of disease are related to diet, and that is either overconsumption, heart and the leading heart disease, cancer, et cetera, but also to the lack of micronutrients that cause infections, and of course to caloric deficits of hunger. Secondly, we know that globally the agricultural system is producing too much of some crops and not enough of others that have been shown to contribute to improved health in terms of heart disease, improved health in terms of micronutrient deficiencies. I will hasten to add, this is a global figure, and we know that there's some areas of the world where they are not getting sufficient animal protein, for example, but looking at it from a global picture, we are not meeting the 100% of global needs in terms of nutrition, and particularly low vegetables and low fruit and nuts and seed production. We also know that agriculture is, again, at the global level, pushing our planetary boundaries, in particular the areas of loss of genetic diversity, increased use of nitrogen and phosphorus, affecting water quality, and changes in land use systems, which aren't quite at the red alert level, but still quite important. Finally, we know that there is a link between what we're eating and the environment. Now, I'm not going to explain this rather complicated chart, but basically, if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, the high bar there is assuming that if we all keep eating the way we're eating and income grows the way we project it to grow, we're going to increase our per capita greenhouse gas emissions from 300 kilograms per person per year to over 400 kilograms per person per year. If we were to adopt a Mediterranean diet, and I can tell you as someone living in Rome, it's really good, we basically have about the same level of greenhouse gas emissions that we do today. Similarly, if you look at the impact on land use changes between an income-dependent projection and a Mediterranean diet, you see a significant reduction in land use, which has all sorts of other implications for natural biodiversity, for carbon emissions, et cetera. So we know that agriculture is a key driver of human and environmental health, but these issues are not being connected in many of the research, much of the research we're doing. So we need to be looking at how food is produced, what's produced, the diversity of crops, the resilience of cropping systems. Where is that food produced? Is it produced in rural areas that might be environmentally risky, or in peri-urban areas that also might contribute to environmental risks? And how are the producers linked to markets? How does that food get into the urban centers? And then what food do people actually eat? Because we know production and consumption are not as linked as maybe we would like. And up until now, we've had agricultural systems where largely production is driving consumption rather than the other way around, consumption determining what is being produced. So why focus on urban areas? Rajul mentioned the fact that we already have half the world in cities. It's going to increase to 2/3 of the world in the not too distant future. Urban populations are generally consuming less healthy and more environmentally intensive diets. This is shifting a bit in some of the wealthier urban centers, but still is quite challenging in many countries, developed and developing. We also know that cities are very important, and cities and their regions are very important in making food policy and land use policies at the local and regional level. And I like to say when I talk about this project and this proposal, is sometimes, as we know in Washington, it's really hard to get national policymakers to act. There's so many different cross-cutting issues. But mayors have to deliver. They have to deliver food, they have to deliver a better environment, they have to deliver lower traffic jams, et cetera, on a daily basis. They are held to account in a way that politicians at the national level are not for what's happening in their cities. There's also a very significant component of jobs that are linked to the agri-food sector. Just a quick anecdote, in London, when they started, put in place a food policy office, the office was located across the Thames, somewhere far away from the center of London. Then they generated data that said 25% of employment in London was due to agriculture. 25%. In small shops, restaurants, delivery vans, et cetera. All of a sudden, that office is now in the mayor's office. Yeah. So we don't know how much the food sector is contributing to jobs and employment in other cities, but thinking about what we see when we travel, we know it's a huge contributor to employment. So why focus on peri-urban areas? So as I said earlier, a lot of the emphasis when we talk about urban, it's a rural-urban. But to think about peri-urban, first of all, is proximity to the centers of population. And we're defining peri-urban as 100 kilometers around a city. And the city is roughly 50 kilometers, again, depending on where you are. The environmental externalities in the peri-urban areas can really affect what happens in cities, particularly on areas like water quality. If you have animal feeding operations in the peri-urban area, you're going to have challenges on water quality. If you have irrigation systems in some countries, you can have more mosquito-borne diseases, for example. Peri-urban area is often a large supplier of the healthy, fresh fruits and vegetables that we enjoy in cities, and it could potentially be a much bigger source of those crops in other cities as well. There's also pressure on agricultural land around urban areas. And I live in Montgomery County. They actually have set-asides now for agricultural land to keep some of the county green. But a lot of the land that is developed in urban areas is environmentally sensitive. It could be producing food and agriculture. There's pressure on land prices. So there's a symbiotic relationship, not always a positive one, between urban and peri-urban, the nearby urban area. So I'm not going to talk through this complex slide either. This is sort of our theory of change or framework for looking at the link between urban outcomes in terms of food affordability, reducing non-communicable diseases. I didn't mention food waste earlier, but that's also an important component, and jobs and employment. And then the impact on rural or peri-urban areas in terms of the ecosystem services, water, flood mitigation, all of these other outcomes that are affected by what is happening in the cities. And we think we have a chance with a focused proposal looking at cities to actually start analyzing, understanding, and helping to shape the kinds of policies that cities and nearby regions are putting in place on their food security and environmental health. So the research proposal that this is based on, we called A Tale of Six Cities. We were working and will continue to work with some pre-existing urban initiatives, the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, which biodiversity had a hand in shaping, the C40 food network. We're working with cities, 6 cities, who are very committed to changing their food sector, environmental sector dynamics. So we wanted to have political buy-in from the top, from the mayor's offices, which we did have in the 6 cities we chose. We were working with cities in 3 different regions, and I can just say it was Copenhagen and Milan, it was Wuhan and Curitiba in Brazil, and Addis Ababa and Accra in Africa. So we wanted to also look at the comparison between how developing, and emerging markets are dealing with these sorts of issues. This also builds and brings together a lot of research that biodiversity has been doing for the past number of years. We also benefited from having strong research partners, including universities and environmental organizations. But one thing I want to say, we've talked about this proposal to others outside of these 6 cities that I just mentioned, and the interest is very high from urban areas to participate in this kind of work. So we use the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact as sort of an intellectual framework. So these 6 areas will be what we look at when we're analyzing what's happening in these cities. You can read them. I think the focus on sustainable diets, food supply and distribution, and production and governance is probably higher than maybe the focus at the moment on food waste, but that certainly is something that's important for many for many cities and for us as a global development organization. And then we looked at several different kinds of institutional and policy levers, both in the rural areas, farmer cooperatives, all the way up to looking at public procurement policies. So this is an active research program, so it's very interactive with the cities. We propose to conduct an assessment in each city, and I'll just go through those quickly. Systems assessment of what's happening, what's been happening in that urban area and the surrounding peri-urban. How are the food and environmental service flows happening in that region? What's the policy environment, and therefore what are the opportunities to intervene? We will also examine existing interventions and look at the impact that those are having on human and environmental health. And this will involve stakeholder consultations in the cities and the surrounding areas, testing some of the, looking at the natural experiments that are happening in each of these 6 cities to test what impact they're having, and then doing some modeling with a modeling tool that we've developed at Biodiversity called Managing Ecosystem Health, the MESH product. And this will enable us to quantify really the gaps between what the desired outcomes are and what's really happening in the urban and peri-urban areas. Then we would work again co-designing with the cities, with the mayor's office, with the peri-urban area, what could be new interventions. And this, what I liked about this proposal is this is really grounded in reality. I mean, because we're going to be working with the mayors, and we could come up with the best intervention in the world that won't work. So we're going to actually be dialoguing with the mayors as we're going through this to design interventions that will actually be implementable by them and owned by them. I think that's also very important. And then we are looking for an innovation fund to provide funding for the pilot studies. So when the cities implement these changes, let's study them. What happens? You know, what's the policy path, but also what happens to environmental health, what happens to human health in the area. So one of the other, I think, very interesting things about this, this project is the possibilities for scaling up and scaling out. Because there are over 100 cities involved in the Milan Food Policy Pact, and more than 40 cities who were, 80 plus cities who were involved in the C40 initiative, there's an automatic learning that can take place from the 6 cities, and you see them in red there, to other cities about what's happening. But learning can also go the other way very easily because we have this resource and this connectivity with these 2 urban initiatives. So this also builds on biodiversity's research, and I'm just going to go quickly over a couple of these areas. So first of all, we have been taking what we call a whole of diet and whole of year approach to nutrition. So this means you know, it's not a fortification strategy. It's actually looking at what is produced or could be produced in a local area to satisfy people's nutrition requirements. Now, this is work that's been done in rural Kenya, but it's similar to work that could be done in these peri-urban areas. In addition, we have a project with the Global Environment Facility called Biodiversity for Food and Nutrition, where we're working with 4 countries on how to improve the use of biodiversity, agricultural biodiversity, in their food systems. I can say more, but I've been given the 5-minute warning. But it's very similar work. How do you increase diversity in their food systems, from both the production side and the consumption side? I mentioned the Mapping Ecosystem Services for Human Well-Being tool that we've developed that allows you to input different changes in land use and see the impact that that would have on ecosystem health, ecosystem services. Finally, biodiversity has been known for many years for its work in creating markets for orphan crops or neglected crops. We've been very involved in the quinoa revolution in the Andes, promoting millets in India, and leafy green vegetables in a number of markets around the world. So getting these out of being seen as poor people's food to being seen as something we all want to consume. And then finally, I'll close with connecting another new idea that we are just starting work on, an agricultural biodiversity index. So what we're doing is developing an index that would measure and monitor the diversity of agricultural biodiversity in consumption systems, production systems, seed systems, and conservation systems. This index can be used to help countries, but it can also be used to help subunits within countries to monitor how their interventions are doing and what policy interventions they could put in place to improve the use of biodiversity. We're also using this index with the private sector to also help incentivize behaviors within the private sector to increase their use and respect for agricultural biodiversity. We have 4 countries who are involved in piloting this index: India, Italy, Peru, and I always forget the 3rd one, Ethiopia, 4th one. And we have 3 large companies, a global food company, a global equipment manufacturer, and a global seed company who are working with us to pilot the initiative in the corporate sector. But we think this mechanism could also be used for issuing bonds, an urban policy bond, an urban bond, for example, that could be measured against these criteria. So we think it's a really exciting development that we'd like to link to this this peri-urban food system project. So with that, I will thank you. I could talk for much longer, but I'm sure I'm just about up with my time. So thank you very much.